Colonel Marcus Steele had 3 rules for his squadron: never question his orders, never compromise safety, and never, under any circumstances, let ground crew anywhere near classified mission briefings. But on a scorching Tuesday morning in August, when he climbed down from his F-22 Raptor and caught sight of a small patch on the shoulder of his refueling technician, all 3 rules were about to be shattered. Meet Sarah Cross, 26 years old. Dark hair kept in regulation braids. Gray eyes that seemed too intense for someone who spent her days pumping jet fuel. For 2 years, she had worked at Edwards Air Force Base in California as a fuel systems technician. Every day at 0530 hours, she arrived before the pilots checked fuel quality, prepared refueling equipment, and serviced the most advanced fighter jets in the American arsenal. The pilots barely knew her name. To them, she was just another enlisted technician in coveralls, one of dozens of support personnel who kept their expensive toys flying. But what nobody at Edwards knew, what her personnel file had been scrubbed to hide, was that Sarah Cross had once been someone very different. Someone with a different name. Someone who had worn a uniform that most people believed was just a myth. And the small patch on her shoulder, barely visible beneath the grime and wear of her work coveralls, was the only remaining evidence of a life she had been forced to leave behind. The patch was small, maybe 2 inches across. Black background, silver wings, and in the center, a symbol that should not exist. Symbol from a program that officially never happened. Colonel Marcus Steele was everything you would expect from a fighter pilot with 20 years of experience. At 45 years old, with steel gray hair that matched his name, he commanded the 412th Test Wing with the kind of authority that came from 3,000 flight hours in nearly every fighter jet the Air Force operated. Steele believed in the chain of command. He believed in protocol. And he absolutely believed that there were certain things ground crew did not need to know. Every morning when Sarah refueled his aircraft, Steele would perform his pre-flight inspection with barely a glance in her direction. If he acknowledged her at all, it was usually a brief nod or a quick question about fuel quantity. Sarah had become part of the background, as invisible as the runway itself. But Steele was not a bad man. He was simply a product of his training, his era, and his absolute devotion to operational security. In his world, information was compartmentalized. Pilots flew. Ground crew maintained. Nobody crossed those lines. Nobody needed to know more than their job required. The morning of August 14th started like every other. Sarah arrived at the flight line at 0530, performed her equipment checks, and prepared for the day's flight operations. The base was conducting advanced weapons testing, pushing the F-22's capabilities in simulated combat scenarios that replicated near-peer adversaries as she connected the fuel line to the first Raptor of the morning. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres approached with the day's fuel manifest. "Sarah, you have Colonel Steele's bird at 0645, full combat load. He is running hot today, back-to-back test flights." Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. The fuel system on Steele's aircraft had been temperamental lately, requiring extra attention during refueling. She had already flagged it in maintenance reports, but test operations could not afford delays. The aircraft would fly, and it was her job to make sure it had the fuel to do so. At 0640, Colonel Steele arrived at the flight line in his flight suit, helmet bag in hand, walking with the confident stride of a man who owned the sky. Sarah was already positioned at his aircraft, running final checks on the fuel system. "Morning, Airman," Steele said without looking at her directly. "Fuel status. Full combat load, sir. 18,000 pounds. System pressure normal. Fuel quality checked and verified." Sarah's voice was professional, crisp. The voice of someone who knew her job completely. Steele nodded and began his walk-around inspection. As he moved around the aircraft, Sarah climbed the maintenance ladder to check the fuel panel one final time. It was routine, something she did dozens of times each day. But this time, as she reached up to close the fuel access panel, her sleeve pulled back slightly. The patch became visible. Steele was standing directly below her, looking up to verify the fuel panel status. His eyes locked onto the small black and silver patch on Sarah's shoulder, and his entire body went rigid. The tablet he was holding slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the concrete. Sarah realized immediately what had happened. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, but it was too late. Steele had seen it, and from the expression on his face, he knew exactly what that patch meant. "Where did you get that patch, Airman?" Steele's voice was quiet, dangerous, the tone of a man who had just seen something impossible. Sarah climbed down from the ladder, her mind racing through options. She could lie, she could deflect, she could claim it was just a novelty item, something bought online. But one look at Steele's face told her that he would know the truth. That patch was not something you could buy. It was not something you could fake. It was something you earned, in a place that did not officially exist. Doing things that were never supposed to be discussed, sir. I can explain. No, Steele cut her off. You cannot explain. Not here. Not in the open. He looked around quickly, ensuring no other personnel were within earshot. His face had gone pale, and Sarah could see his hands shaking slightly. That patch does not exist. The program does not exist. So how in the name of everything holy are you wearing it on my flight line? Have you ever had a secret so dangerous that its exposure could destroy not just your life, but the lives of everyone connected to you? Drop a comment below if you have ever had to hide who you really are just to survive. Sarah stood at attention, her gray eyes meeting Steele's without flinching. Sir, with respect, this conversation cannot happen here. Steele stared at her for a long moment, his military training warring with his need for answers. Finally, he grabbed his tablet from the ground and spoke in a low, controlled voice. My office, 1300 hours. Until then, you do not speak to anyone about this. Understood? Yes, sir. Steele turned and walked toward the operations building, leaving his aircraft sitting on the flight line, unfilled. Sarah watched him go, knowing that the life she had carefully constructed over the past 2 years was about to crumble. The patch had been her one mistake, her one moment of sentimentality in a world that demanded she forget everything she had been, as she disconnected the fuel line and secured her equipment. Senior Airman Dave Martinez approached with a confused expression. Hey, Cross, what was that about? Colonel Steele just walked away from his bird. That never happens. Sarah forced a neutral expression. Equipment issue. He will be back later. But Martinez was not buying it. I have worked this flight line for 4 years. Steele has never walked away from a pre-flight. Something happened. What did you say to him? Nothing, Martinez. Just focus on your own aircraft. As Martinez walked away, still looking suspicious, Sarah knew the clock was ticking. By 1300 hours, she would have to explain the unexplainable. She would have to tell Colonel Marcus Steele about a program that officially never existed, a mission that never happened, and a pilot who was supposed to be dead. The hours between 0645 and 1300 felt like years. Sarah went through the motions of her job, refueling aircraft, checking systems, maintaining equipment. But her mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios, preparing for what was about to happen. She had been so careful. For 2 years, she had hidden in plain sight, becoming just another face on the flight line. The patch had been sewn onto her coveralls during a moment of weakness, a memorial to everything she had lost. She had convinced herself it was small enough, worn enough, that nobody would notice. She had been wronged. At 12:55 hours, Sarah stood outside Colonel Steele's office in the operations building. Through the window, she could see him inside, pacing back and forth, occasionally stopping to look at something on his computer screen. He was researching, trying to understand what that patch meant. She knocked at exactly 1,300 hours. Enter Sarah walked into the office and came to attention. Colonel Steele was standing behind his desk, his face a mixture of confusion, anger, and something that looked like fear. Close the door. Airman Cross. Sarah closed the door and returned to attention. Steele gestured to a chair. Sit. This conversation is off the record. But I need answers, and I need them now. Sarah sat, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Where would you like me to begin, sir? Steele pulled the patch image up on his computer screen. He had found it. Somehow, despite all the classification and secrecy, he had found reference to the symbol. I have been searching classified databases for the past 6 hours. That patch appears in exactly 3 documents, all of which are classified at levels I should not even know exist. Those documents reference a program called Shadowfall, a program that, according to official records, never happened. He turned the screen toward Sarah, showing a heavily redacted document with the same wing and symbol design. This program allegedly involved a small group of pilots flying experimental stealth aircraft in denied territories. Missions that could never be acknowledged. Pilots who, for all official purposes, did not exist. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. So I will ask you again, Airman Cross. How are you wearing that patch? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment. The moment where she either trusted this man or destroyed any chance of maintaining her cover, sir. My real name is not Sarah Cross. It is Captain Sarah Blackwood. Call sign, Raven. I flew 47 missions for Shadowfall between 2019 and 2022. Experimental, stealth reconnaissance aircraft over territories in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific. I logged 1,200 flight hours in aircraft that do not have names, do not have serial numbers, and do not appear in any Air Force inventory. The room fell into absolute silence. Steele sat back in his chair, his face pale. That is impossible. Shadowfall was shut down in 2022 after the Ukraine incident, Sarah finished. Yes, sir. I was there. Steele's hands gripped the arms of his chair. The Ukraine incident had been one of the most classified operations in modern military history. An experimental reconnaissance aircraft had been shot down over contested territory. The pilot had been listed as killed in action, her body never recovered. The program had been immediately terminated, all records sealed. All personnel reassigned to positions where they could be monitored and controlled. You are supposed to be dead. Steele whispered, I am dead, sir. Captain Sarah Blackwood died in that crash. The Air Force held a closed funeral. My family thinks I am buried in Arlington. I spent 6 months in a classified medical facility recovering from injuries that officially never happened. Then I was given a choice. Accept a new identity and a job that would keep me under observation, or face charges for security violations that could put me in prison for the rest of my life. What security violations? Sarah's eyes grew cold. I survived, sir. The aircraft was equipped with technology that could not fall into enemy hands. I was supposed to activate the self-destruct system before ejecting. But the plane was damaged so badly that ejection was not possible. I had to crash land in hostile territory, which meant the aircraft remained partially intact. She paused, the memory clearly painful. It took me 4 days to walk out of that territory. By the time I reached friendly forces, certain foreign powers had already examined the wreckage. Technology was compromised. And according to certain people in the Pentagon, that was my fault. Steele stood and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where F-22s sat gleaming in the California sun. So they buried you. Gave you a new name and stuck you here as a fuel technician. A punishment. Sarah nodded. A punishment and insurance. As long as I am here, visible, doing mundane work, I am not talking about Shadowfall. I am not writing books. I am not becoming a liability. She stood, her military bearing returning. And I was fine with that, sir. I was ready to spend the rest of my career pumping fuel and staying invisible, until you saw the patch. Steele turned from the window. Why did you keep it? Why risk everything for a piece of cloth? Because it is the only proof that I existed, sir, that my missions meant something, that the pilots who did not come back were real. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Shadowfall was not just a program. It was a family, and I am the only one left. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of secrets that should never be spoken. Steele returned to his desk and sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older than his 45 years. You understand, I have to report this. Sarah nodded. I understand, sir. But before Steele could reach for his phone, the office intercom crackled to life with an urgent voice. Colonel Steele, you are needed in the operations center immediately. Priority Alpha situation. Steele pressed the intercom button. What is the situation? Sir, I cannot discuss it over this channel. You need to come now. Steele looked at Sarah, torn between dealing with the revelation that had just exploded in his office and responding to what sounded like a genuine emergency. Stay here. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. We are not finished with this conversation. Yes, sir. As Steele rushed out of the office, Sarah sat alone, knowing that whatever was happening in the operations center was about to make her situation either much better or much worse. Through the window, she could see increased activity on the flight line. Ground crews running, security vehicles moving into position. Something big was happening. She stood and walked to the window, her trained eye picking up details that most people would miss. The flight line was being cleared of all non-essential personnel. Fuel trucks were being repositioned. The alert hangar, normally quiet, was suddenly alive with activity. This was not a drill. Then her tablet, still connected to the base notification system, lit up with an alert that made her blood run cold. All qualified pilots report to operations immediately. Exercise Dagger Strike has been moved from simulation to actual deployment. Repeat, this is not a drill. All pilots report immediately. Sarah knew Exercise Dagger Strike. It was a contingency, planned for responding to hostile aircraft entering protected airspace over critical infrastructure. The fact that it had gone from simulation to actual deployment meant something serious was happening, something that required every available pilot. Through the window, she watched as pilots ran to their aircraft. Ground crews scrambled to prepare jets for immediate launch. But something was wrong. There were not enough pilots. Several aircraft sat ready on the flight line, but nobody was claiming them. Her tablet lit up again with a message that sent chills down her spine. All stations, we have multiple unidentified aircraft approaching from the west. Estimated time to protected airspace, 30 minutes. All available interceptors launch immediately. Sarah's trained mind immediately began analyzing the tactical situation. Edwards Air Force Base had perhaps a dozen F-22 Raptors ready to fly. But she had been on the flight line all morning. She knew exactly how many pilots were available. And based on the activity she was seeing, they did not have enough. The door to Steele's office burst open. The colonel stood there, his face grim. Airman Cross, I need you to be honest with me right now. When you said you logged 1,200 flight hours, were any of those hours in fighters? Sarah felt her heart rate spike. Sir, Shadowfall aircraft were reconnaissance platforms, but we received full fighter combat training, air-to-air tactics, weapon systems, electronic warfare. We had to be able to defend ourselves if detected. She paused. Why are you asking, sir? Steele stepped fully into the office and closed the door. Because I have 12 aircraft and 9 pilots. 3 of my squadron are sick with food poisoning from last night. 2 more are grounded for medical issues. And someone just decided to test our airspace with what looks like at least 15 hostile contacts. He looked at her with an expression she could not read. So, I'm going to ask you a question that will either save lives or end my career. Can you fly an F-22 Raptor? Sarah's mind raced. This was insane. She had not flown combat aircraft in over 2 years. Her flight status had been revoked. She was officially not even qualified to sit in a cockpit, much less fly the most advanced fighter jet in existence. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. Her real father, not the fiction created for her cover story. Colonel David Blackwood, who had taught her to fly before teaching her to drive. When the moment comes, sweetheart, you fly. You do not think about the rules. You do not worry about the consequences. You fly because that is what pilots do, sir. Sarah said carefully, I am not current on the F-22 specifically, but I have time in similar aircraft. Similar enough that I could manage if absolutely necessary. That was not exactly true. Shadowfall aircraft had been even more advanced than the Raptor in many ways, but she could not tell Steele that without revealing details that would put them both in prison. Steele made a decision that would echo through both their careers. Grab a flight suit. You are now temporary flight status under emergency provisions. Your call sign for this mission is Raven. And airmen, if you get one of my aircraft damaged, we will both be court-martialed. Understood? Sarah stood, her professional military bearing snapping into place. Understood, sir. Where do you keep the flight suits? Steele pointed to a locker in the corner of his office. Use mine. They should fit close enough. He grabbed a tablet and began pulling up aircraft assignments. You will take Bird 325, already fueled and armed, thanks to your own work this morning. Tactical frequency will be briefed en route to the aircraft. As Sarah changed into the flight suit, her hands moved with practiced efficiency. This was familiar territory. The feel of Nomex fabric, the weight of survival gear, the ritual of preparing for flight. For 2 years, she had believed this part of her life was over. Now, in the most unexpected way possible. She was going back to where she belonged, sir, she said, as she zipped up the flight suit. What is the tactical situation? Steele pulled up a map on his computer. 15 unknown aircraft approaching from the west. They are maintaining radio silence and have not responded to identification requests. Current trajectory puts them over restricted airspace in 25 minutes. Airspace that covers one of our most sensitive research facilities. He looked at her gravely. If those aircraft reach their objective, the damage to national security would be catastrophic. Sarah studied the map, her tactical mind automatically analyzing approach vectors, intercept points, and defensive positions. Sir, with 12 aircraft against 15, we are going to need perfect coordination. What is the engagement protocol? Steele handed her a mission card with encrypted tactical information. Intercept and identify. Hostile intent is confirmed. You are authorized to engage. Rules of engagement are simple. Protect the facility at all costs. As they walked toward the door, Steele stopped and turned to face her. Airman Cross, or Captain Blackwood, or whoever you really are. If you survive this, we're going to have a very long conversation about your future. But right now, I need you to be the pilot you used to be. Can you do that? Sarah met his eyes without hesitation. Sir, I never stopped being that pilot. I just stopped flying. The walk to the flight line was surreal. Sarah Cross, the invisible fuel technician, was now striding across the tarmac in a flight suit, helmet under her arm, heading toward an F-22 Raptor that she would soon be flying into combat. Ground crew members who had barely noticed her for 2 years now stared in confusion and shock. Senior Airman Martinez approached cautiously. Cross, what is happening? Why are you in a flight suit? Steele answered before Sarah could respond. Airman Cross is now Lieutenant Cross, temporarily activated under emergency provisions. Brief your questions for after the mission. Martinez, as they reached aircraft 325, Sarah performed her walk-around inspection with the practiced eye of a combat pilot. Every panel, every surface, every system received her attention. This was not just an aircraft. This was a weapon system worth $150 million, and in a few minutes, she would be pushing it to its absolute limits. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, approached with a confused expression. "Sir, I do not have Lieutenant Cross in my pilot roster." "She is in it now, Sergeant," Steele said firmly. "Get her aircraft ready for immediate launch." Williams looked at Sarah with newfound respect mixed with confusion. "Ma'am, Bird 325 is fully fueled, full weapons load." "Are you current on the F-22? Sarah climbed the ladder to the cockpit. "Sergeant, I will let the aircraft speak for itself. Right now, we have hostiles inbound. And this Raptor needs to be in the air." As Sarah settled into the pilot's seat, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved across the instrument panel, checking systems, verifying displays, preparing the aircraft for flight. The cockpit felt different from the Shadowfall aircraft she had flown, but the fundamentals were the same. Thrust, lift, control. The physics of flight did not change, but as her fingers moved across unfamiliar switches, she felt a moment of doubt. What if 2 years on the ground had dulled her edge? What if the trauma of her last mission had broken something essential inside her? What if she was about to get herself and others killed? Then the tower's voice crackled through her helmet radio. "All aircraft, hostile contacts now 20 minutes from restricted airspace. All interceptors are cleared for immediate launch. Weapons free upon confirmed hostile intent." Sarah's doubt evaporated. There was no time for fear, no space for second-guessing. 15 hostile aircraft were approaching, and she was one of the pilots standing between them and their objective. She keyed her radio, her voice calm and professional. "Tower, this is Raven. Aircraft 325 requesting immediate taxi and takeoff clearance." There was a pause. Then a confused voice responded. "Raven, I do not have you in the system. Confirm call sign and pilot identity." Colonel Steele's voice cut through the confusion. "Tower, this is Steele. Raven is authorized. Clear her for immediate takeoff. We do not have time for paperwork." Another pause. Then, "Raven, you are cleared to taxi. Runway 22. Good luck." The twin engines of the F-22 Raptor roared to life beneath her. Sarah felt the familiar vibration of immense power barely contained, waiting to be unleashed. This was what she had been born to do. This was who she really was, beneath the coveralls and the fake name and the 2 years of invisible servitude. She taxied onto the runway, watching as other F-22s launched ahead of her. Each pilot represented thousands of hours of training and millions of dollars of investment. And here she was, a dead woman with a secret past, about to join them in defending American airspace. "Tower, Raven is ready for takeoff. Raven, you are cleared for takeoff. Join formation on bearing 270. Climb to 40,000 feet. Colonel Steele will have tactical command. Sarah, advance the throttles." The F-22 accelerated down the runway with brutal power. At 180 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and the aircraft leaped into the California sky. For the first time in 2 years, Captain Sarah Blackwood was flying, and somewhere ahead, 15 hostile aircraft were about to discover that the dead pilot had just returned from the grave. Asterisk at 42,000 feet. Sarah's radar locked onto the hostile formation. 15 aircraft flying in precise combat spread. But something was wrong. Their electronic signatures matched no known fighter in any database. Then her threat warning receiver screamed. Someone had locked onto her aircraft with targeting radar. But the lock came from behind the hostile formation from an aircraft that should not be there. A 16th contact, hidden in the radar clutter. Flying a profile she recognized instantly. It was a Shadowfall aircraft. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The program had been terminated. All aircraft destroyed. Unless someone had kept one operational. Someone who knew she was alive. All aircraft, this is Raven. Break formation now. This is a trap. But before Steele could respond, the 16th aircraft launched. Not at the American fighters. At the 15 hostile contacts ahead, in 30 seconds. All 15 aircraft were destroyed by a pilot flying with impossible precision. Then the Shadowfall aircraft turned toward Edwards, transmitting on Sarah's old encrypted frequency. "Hello, Raven. Welcome back from the dead. You have questions. Meet me on the ground." 20 minutes later, the mysterious aircraft landed at Edwards. When the pilot climbed out and removed their helmet, Sarah froze. It was Colonel David Blackwood. Her father. The man she had been told died 5 years ago. "Dad? Hello, sweetheart. Sorry for the dramatic entrance. But we needed to activate you again. Shadowfall never ended. It just went deeper. And we need our best pilot back." Colonel Steele stood speechless as Sarah embraced her father. Years of grief and confusion pouring out. 3 months later, Captain Sarah Blackwood officially returned from the dead. Her cover as a fuel technician ended. But the questions remained. How many other dead pilots were still flying? How deep did Shadowfall really go? And somewhere in a classified hangar, more aircraft waited. More missions that would never be acknowledged. More pilots who did not officially exist. Because sometimes, the people pumping your fuel are actually the ones protecting your freedom. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more incredible tales of hidden heroes and classified operations.